This little manuscript here is called Hayklans Luck, and it's by Elizabeth Cochrane. Chapter 4. Nothing can save the good and the brave but meaningless luck. There is a thing in our family called Hayklans Luck. It occurs from time to time when things are at their worst for us, such as bankruptcies, bombs, bee stings, and other things too bad to mention. At such times, something usually occurs to put things right. There are, of course, exceptions to every rule, the most notable being the luck of your great-grandpapa, my husband Michael. He was a dedicated gambler, and although he usually won considerable sums of money during a race meeting, he invariably backed a knock-kneed outsider and lost it all on the last race. However, the first stroke of this luck I am telling you about came many, many years ago, perhaps about the time of the Stuarts were reigning in this country. Your great-grandpapa Boris Hayklan would not be sure of the exact date of this occurrence when he told me of it. Anyway, about this time there was a rich Jewish merchant living in a town in Lithuania, which is in East Russia. His surname of Hayklan was not a usual one in Russia or among the Jewish population. It was thought to have originated in Sweden or some northern country where Hackland or Hayklan are more common. And Hayklan, I am telling you about, lived in that part of this city known as the ghetto, as did most of the Jewish population. He had a pleasant establishment and travelled to many places and even other countries on his business. Once when riding with his goods and retinue through a forest in Poland, he was set upon by robbers who were overpowering his men, and he would undoubtedly have lost all his goods and even his life, but he was saved by the intervention of a young man who chanced to be nearby. He and his companions managed to drive off the robbers. The two men took refuge in a nearby farm, and from that day became great friends. It seems that the young rescuer was a Polish count who was in great trouble. He was being hunted for his life by his enemies. Who they were was not disclosed, and although he owned many estates both in Poland and Russia, he was obliged to leave Poland and hide for some time. He was invited to live with the Hayklan family, and this he did until his death. He did not marry, and before his death he willed all his extensive estates, both in Poland and Russia, to his friend. His friend was now too old to travel, so his sons were sent to view these properties, which were now legally their own. The young men did not attempt to view the Polish properties, but found that one in Russia was very extensive, considering of vast forest lands, nearly 200 square miles in area, with many farms and a large mansion. This was called the Forest of Marina. The young men decided to keep only about half of these lands. The rest they sold and decided to live in the large house. At that time, Jews were not allowed to own land in Russia, therefore they had to conceal their religion in order to keep it or even give it up. With their fair colouring from Nordic origins, they were generally accepted as non-Jewish. Possibly no one bothered to inquire about it. The family lived on this property for many generations. The Hayklan energy and love of orderliness soon put the neglected estate and run-down tenants' farms into good order, and by the middle of the 19th century, when our tale begins, the estate was flourishing indeed, and they had enough meat and grain in their barns to last for 4 years. By the late 19th century, the property was in the hands of a widow with 3 sons and 1 daughter. The youngest of the sons was your great-grandfather Boris, who spent his boyhood in the vast forests of this estate. Chapter 5. Trans-Siberian Railway. Farewell, farewell, farewell. No sadder word was ever spoken. It was the custom among better-class Russian families for one of their sons to join the army. This unfortunate fate came to the young Boris when he was nearly 18. His eldest brother was to manage the estate. His other brother being at the university, there was no help for it. However, he collected 4 horses and a groom and was supplied with a very fancy uniform, which he was very pleased with. He had no military training, and before he hardly had time to button up his new jacket, he was called to the front in northeast Siberia, where the Russo-Japanese War was taking place. It is perhaps very fortunate that we do not always know when we do or see something for the last time. When I last skied down a Swiss mountain slope, I did not know that I would never do it again. When I watched a 4-masted brig leave Southampton harbour and go hull down over the horizon, I did not know that I would never see such a lovely sight again. When Boris said goodbye to his mother and sister, who wept over the parting, he did not know that he would never see his Arcadian forest again. If he had, he would have wept also. He had released the last white fox from its trap. The only people who were relieved at his going were the farmers, who made money out of the white fox fur. Boris and his horses and groom boarded the train. It was appallingly cold, and grew more so as the journey progressed. There was little food, no heating, and nothing hot to drink. As the days passed, many soldiers became ill with hypothermia, and some died. Boris was concerned for his horses, but they were better off than the men, having plenty of fodder and warm blankets. One day the young man sitting next to Boris seemed to moan and seemed about to collapse. Boris rushed along to the horses and snatched a blanket. This he wrapped around the young man, but in a few hours he was dead. Boris held the dead boy in his arms and wondered how he could survive himself. Being a practical chap, he thought it best to help himself. He returned to the horse boxes and huddled under the blankets with his groom until the terrible journey was over. When this happened, a sulky and frustrated Boris reported himself to his colonel. The colonel was sulky and frustrated also. "I don't know why you came," he said. "You'd better go home at once." Boris was aghast. "What, in that awful train?" he asked. "Yes," said the colonel. "I'm sending as many young chaps home as I can. If you stay, you will either be taken prisoner by the chaps or be killed. We are losing this war." "I'm not going on that railway," said Boris. "Then go home the other way," said the colonel. "Which way?" asked Boris. "Over to America, of course," said the colonel. "Get your parents to give you a banker's draft for New York and Paris. Have you enough money for the ship to America?" Boris had. He also had enough money to pay a local farmer to look after his groom and horses until the better weather came, when they could return home in comfort. At the nearest seaport he took a berth on a freighter to America. He brought a civilian suit and dropped his uniform over the side of the ship and watched it drift gently away. Here again is an example of Hayklans luck. Had the young man arrived at the front earlier, he might have been engaged in the fighting and either gone home with the troops or even been killed. As it was, he left Russia forever, although he did not wish to, and so avoided the tragedy of his family of the Bolshevik Revolution. Chapter 6. Paris. The last time I saw Paris, her heart was young and gay. Your great-grandpa did not have much to say about his journey across America, except that the town was warm, the food bearable, and the English spoken was quite unintelligible to him. His English was practically perfect, except that he never learned to say achieved properly. It was always "we have achieved," nothing by starting so late. Nothing is achieved by bad manners. To go back to the young Boris, he landed in France at the port of Le Havre and took a train to Paris. Paris of Edward V, Paris of the Entente Cordiale, Paris of the Boc du Boulogne, of the Champs-Élysées, of the street cafe, of the accordions playing and the lovers embracing in public, Paris in the spring. What young man of 18 would wish to leave her? Boris did not. He stayed and stayed. He soon found that there was a great many expatriate Russians living in Paris. There was a small restaurant and dance place on the left bank, much frequented by them, and to this he took himself night after night. One evening he noticed a middle-aged couple accompanied by a young girl. He could not take his eyes off her. She was tiny and blonde, with golden hair and bright blue eyes. Her small corseted figure was clothed in sparkling white. She did not look much older than 14 and was exactly like a fairy off a Christmas tree. Boris came to their table and introduced himself. The man introduced himself also in the Russian manner, with his surname first, Rankov, Michael Petrovich. This is my wife Sarah, and my niece Leah. Boris explained his presence in Paris, and after a while asked if he might dance with Leah. This he did, not once, but many times, bringing her back to her uncle's table between every dance, as is the custom in France. The Russian inhabitants of Paris at that time were not, as they were later, emigrants from the communist regime, but quite the reverse. They were mostly intellectuals and Jews who objected to the Tsarist regime and were very like the Marxist coterie in Highgate. Therefore, Leah's uncle had very different views and came from a very different background to that of Boris. This did not deter the young man. In fact, nothing could deter him from his fairy tale princess. They met many times, and eventually Boris, forgetting his home and his horse and his beloved woods, asked her uncle for Leah's hand in marriage. Leah's uncle objected strongly. He told Leah, "He is an aristocrat. He has far too much money. He is far too grand for you." This seems a strange objection to a marriage, and Leah said so. In spite of her childish looks, she was a very strong-minded young woman, and eventually overruled her uncle's objections, especially as Boris no longer wished to return home. His mother had died. His elder brother had married a lady he particularly disliked, and was now in charge of the estate. His horse and dog had died also. There was nothing to tempt him away from his new love, who did not want to leave Paris either. Leah was in this city because of some great trouble her brothers were in. Her father was a farmer and innkeeper in a small township in the north of Russia. Many of these villages were wholly Jewish on account of the early migration of Jews from Europe, and the people were of more Slavic origins than Hebrewic, as they had been converted in the very early times of the Jewish faith. Leah's father had 2 sons who, as she called it, plotted against the Tsar, and in consequence were sent to Siberia. They did not like it there, and as they said, there was nothing to keep them there except the snow and ice, so they set off to walk home. It took them about a year and a half. When they arrived, they found their father rather out of sympathy with their communist views. "I have much land and 10 cows," he said, whom I all know by name. Why should I have 300 all belonging to someone else besides myself? However, his sons kept on about collective farming and made themselves still more unpopular with the authorities. So their father packed them off to Paris, and later sent his younger children also to their uncle, who was running a successful furrier business there. The older boys went to America eventually, where they set up a chain of shoe stores in Dallas, Texas, and forgot all about collective farms. The younger one went to Ireland and managed the Dublin tramways, and he also was too busy bringing up a family to worry about politics of his natural land. Chapter 7. Angleterre. Who travels English counties, takes any place that comes, when April tosses bounty to the cherries and the plums. She's no idea who wrote it, but she just liked it. And so our young people were married. Lee, not more than 17, and Boris about 19. They set up home in the usual Paris apartment house and were very much in love. Lee did not believe in having menfolk under her feet all day when she was making borscht or polishing the charming inlaid furniture she had bought, so she encouraged Boris to take an interest in her uncle's business, that of a furrier. Boris wasn't at all interested and muddled up the books by overpaying anyone among the workers who looked pathetic. However, his uncle-in-law soon found that Boris's charm of manner caused hypnotised customers to order far more fur coats than they needed. I would have cast him into that fire, explained the uncle, but, for example, regard the way he sells things. So Boris attended the workshop when he felt like it and sold 20 coats to shops that only needed 10. The stairs leading to the young couple's apartment were very dirty. Leah bore down upon the concierge one day and, removing his newspaper, asked, "These stairs, whose duty is it to clean them?" "No person," stammered the astounded concierge. Lee wasted no time. She went out and purchased a bucket and a scrubbing brush and began to scrub the stairs from top to bottom. It took her a long time, as they were very dirty and large, and she was very small. She had not finished when Boris came home from his evening meal. He was affable. He was tout ce qu'il a accessible. He was not one to lose his temper, but this time he did. He seized the scrubbing brush, and Leah tried to get it back. They fell over the bucket and the water cascaded over the concierge, who was annoyed as he was looking to see if he had won anything in the state lottery. He hadn't, and serve him right. After a small battle on the slippery stairs, Boris gave the concierge far more francs to buy another paper and told him to find a cleaning woman. He begged Leah to promise never to scrub the stairs again. So peace was restored, but Leah said firmly, "I would rather cast myself in that fire than walk again up such stairs." I should like to point out to you young people that however charming lovers' quarrels may be, they should not be indulged in after the age of 24 or so, and should be left behind along with cherry brandy, frilly frocks and toffee apples. To appease his wife, Boris took a little house in a village or suburb just outside Paris. This house had green shutters, a small garden, and the stairs were reasonably clean, although Leah often had to wash them on the quiet. They lived here in rural seclusion for a year or two, and it was here that their first child was born in a local nursing home. That would be my great-grandfather. No, my grandfather. My grandfather. I do believe that they did lose one child before him, but that's not mentioned in this story. The nurses were delighted with Leah. "Regardez," they said, "this is a bébé giving birth to a bébé." They were wrong. It was more like a Valkyrie giving birth to a centaur. The child was named Michael. His brothers Nathaniel and Raphael were born here also, but after a time Leah became irritated and threatened to cast herself into the anthracic stove unless someone cleared up the village. Foiled by the race crowds who were continually throwing caperole packets at it on their way to Autiel, I'm not quite sure of the pronunciation of that, Autiel racecourse, she said they would have to move to somewhere cleaner. I think you can see a pattern here. She is definitely OCD when it comes to cleaning. To this end, they stayed at a farm in Normandy to look around. After a while, Leah said, "These cows, they are not clean like my father's cows. This farm, it is mud and cowslap everywhere. We must try another country." They therefore left the boys at the farm and visited Holland, Belgium, even Luxembourg. Some were dirty, some were a bit cleaner than others, but not clean enough, so they daringly took ship to England. They landed in Kent. It was apple blossom time. The fields were white with Queen Anne's lace, the trees in their fresh spring green. "Fetch the children," said Leah. This is where we shall live." So the children were fetched, and they stayed with the usual uncle in London. Most Jewish families have an uncle in all the capital cities. The uncle advised them to go to an estate agent's. Boris explained what he wanted. He described his old home in Russia, mansions, forests, farms and all. "I'm afraid we have nothing like that," said the agent. "But this might do." He produced particulars of a Queen Anne manor house in Uxbridge. It did well enough. It had a field, an orchard, a pleasing frontage to the main road, and very clean stairs. It had been a girls' boarding school. It soon became Leah's boarding school. The boys told them that their earliest memories of it consisted of scrubbing most of the staircases and kitchens with silver sand and sugar soap.